Advisor Sir Patrick Vallance said a release in lockdown measures could see a spike in cases, and therefore it meant they couldn't rule out national lockdown measures would be introduced.
As you release measures, as Chris has said, it is inevitable as you get more contacts that you will see more cases. I mean, that's what happened, and that's therefore a consequence of anything that's done to release measures. Now, at the moment, we're in a position where things stay low and they look okay, but I don't think, looking around the world, that you would say you would rest on your laurels and assume that's going to be the case. Come winter, the challenges will be very much greater, and of course there is a risk that this could also need national measures as well.
Sir Patrick Vallance referencing Chris Whitley and there later that day. Prime Minister Boris Johnson, this is Friday, spoke that it has more money for the NHS to prepare for winter and possibly looking at a second wave. Today I can confirm providing an additional £3 billion of funding to the NHS in England to get ready for winter. Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland also receive additional funds. It is my strong and sincere hope that we will be able to review the outstanding restrictions and allow a more significant return to normality from November at the earliest, possibly in time for Christmas. So as controversy over whether there will or will not be a second lockdown, and the Prime Minister calling it a nuclear option, this is what Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said.
I think it is right now to give businesses in the country that sense of target and a sense of hope. So we're doing it very carefully, as we said. The conditions are there. We're monitoring it very carefully. We do hope to be able to get back closer to normal, and we take careful steps, for sure-footed steps on the roadmap towards that eventual destination.
Let's get away from politicians and hopefully speak to people who are let's go to Professor Gina Radford, who's former Deputy Chief Medical Officer for England and former head of the Public Health Unit at the Public Health Service, well positioned to speak of this. Did you mind my asking initially, and thank you very much for coming on, do you think there will be a second wave or a series of spikes in different parts of the country?
I mean, what will happen, I'm sure, is we will have lots of local spikes. But whether that actually ends up being a full-blown second wave that's going to hit the whole country, I really don't know. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on how effective local test and trace systems are. It depends on how much immunity is around already in certain communities. And it just depends also on what the virus is like at the time and if there's anything else going on. But the reality is they don't really lose.
When you hear language such as nuclear option in an interview with the Sunday Telegraph yesterday, Mr. Johnson, it is like a nuclear deterrent. I don't want to use it, and nor do I think we'll be in that position again. Well, let's lose the second half of that sentence. But how appropriate is it to liken it to a nuclear deterrent, Professor?
Well, I can see what the Prime Minister could do. I mean, at the end of the day, a nuclear deterrent is really to try and make people behave in certain ways, isn't it? Because it's there to scare us, so that we don't actually end up using nuclear weapons. In the same way, I think what the Prime Minister is trying to indicate is that this would be the last. I don't want to have to do it. Therefore, please, let's just adhere to the guidance and the advice that's out there now. So in that way, I can understand where he's coming from, but it's fairly emotive language.
Lastly, the people in posts such as you held, Deputy Chief Medical Officer for England, these are hugely responsible posts with a lot of pressure. Come the winter, is there a real danger that somebody who will have flu, and I'm not minimising flu for a moment, or severe cold, will actually think they've got COVID-19? How are we going to differentiate that? Otherwise, a lot of people could be staying away from a lot of jobs.
Yeah, this is going to be very difficult because there are some similarities in some of the symptoms, but COVID tends to also have some symptoms that are particular to it. We all fever maybe. COVID has this cough and one or two other symptoms that seem to be very particular to COVID. So I think the key is going to be, can we distinguish easily so people know the symptoms? Are they sufficiently different? And of course the key is going to be how widespread we can have the testing.
Yeah, indeed, that's the key. I'm so grateful for your time, Reverend Professor Gina Radford. You were, as I said, Deputy Chief Medical Officer for England, 12 after 7, listening to that. Ellis Cashmore is Professor of Sociology at Aston University and helped us regularly actually through the whole pandemic. Again, I'll put this question to you, if I may, Ellis, the choice of words such as nuclear option or nuclear deterrent. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. It's either a very clumsy choice of terminology or a very revealing one, because as the professor has just explained, the nuclear deterrent is not meant to be used. It's meant to be held in abeyance in a way to force us to comply with the behaviour that they want us. And this seems characteristic of Boris Johnson's administration. He wants us to comply in a way that suits him. And yet his messages, as we've seen over the last 3 months, have been somewhat contradictory. What I see as his main priority, his only priority at the moment, is to rescue the economy and to try to minimise this mass unemployment that we're seeing on the horizon, and to try to encourage, to give employers confidence to expand their work, to hire people, and to avoid this disastrous unemployment. He won't do that if he's threatening another lockdown. No employer is going to say, well, we can look forward to the future with some confidence. We're going to expand. Let's get business going. Let's get those tills ringing again. They're not going to do that if he's holding this threat of a nuclear option over their head and saying, well, if things go slightly wrong, we might still go into another lockdown.
Now, Professor, I totally agree with you, and I have been a voice for some time that we need to get people back to work, because if we don't go to work, we won't raise the money, we won't be able to have schools or an NHS, because we won't have it. But there are many, who would point to the fact that the death toll is now over 45,300, and they would say people like you are playing with their lives.
I know they will. They do say it to me. But my response is this. First of all, we've seen a report last week that maybe, just maybe, that we have exaggerated the death toll in any case, and that many of the people who have died in a way that's been attributed to COVID have
She's a bus driver.
Now that people are using public transport again, we really need to make sure that we keep each other safe. Passengers need to stay 2 metres apart. If that's not possible, make it at least 1 metre. I want to see everyone wearing face coverings over their mouth and nose unless you've got a good reason not to. And when you get to where you're going, you need to wash your hands. We've still got to play our part.
Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives. Look for Worry Breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973. 20 minutes after 7. Come to some of your reactions concerning our conversation. 8-second lockdown, the nuclear option or nuclear deterrent might it be necessary. We'll quickly take you through the front pages of the newspapers. It's atypical. I was going to say it's a typical Monday. Actually, it's a typical summer Monday as well, in that so many papers and so many different news lines. Let me quickly look at, I think possibly for me, the story, notwithstanding the importance of lockdowns and the importance of the conflict with China, but possibly the story for me that resonates is Backlog Britain. It's the front page of the Daily Mail, and I'll be asking you, this is another knock-on effect, of course, of COVID-19. And remember, when we first locked down, the most important, quite right, was everybody's life. And there's nothing more important than that. But now, of course, the aftermath starts to gain weight. Families apply for holiday passports, trying to register a birth, trying to renew your driving license, or indeed actually physically get your first driver's license. Driving license, I'm not sure which is if you drive those. Have you been affected by the what's called bureaucratic backlogs that are holding you back? So do let me know whether it is getting your passport, how successful have you been with that. I can imagine it's very difficult trying to renew your driver's license, or indeed trying to register a birth, possibly actually, I suppose, trying to register a death and even get probate care. That must be pretty tough, I would imagine. We'll look at that. Quickly through the remaining front pages. The Times goes with the China tensions, as they call them. We're going to bring you more details on that. COVID aspects from the front page of the Daily Telegraph. Lockdown may cause 200,000 extra deaths. The official report reveals possible cost of measures to protect against the pandemic. Their pictures, of course, of the Duke of York was able to walk Princess Beatrice down the aisle for her wedding weekend. Of course, the photographs you see, the Duke of York, Prince Andrew, absent from all of them in the newspapers, making a lot of that. The Daily Express making up house prices, saying they could bounce back to hit a new high. We'll look at that in more detail in a review of the World of Finance in around 10 minutes time. The Guardian tells us how leading doctors are issuing a warning and telling the public to help prevent a devastating second wave of the virus, getting that mood music going that is out there. The Sun newspaper has a story that the Tower of London beefeaters face the axe for the first time in 500 years because of coronavirus. The words that being face the axe, I've read so many times that they're going to be phased out for various reasons. Somehow I can't see it. The Daily Mirror tells us the NHS heroes are forced to work for free. NHS staff working 11 extra unpaid hours a week. And we finish with the Eye. And this is again, they go with the China story. This is China and UK trade bars as relations hit new low. Now, where might that story be taking us? We'll have an expert in just a second. But let's bring you a little of what was said yesterday. This is China's ambassador to the UK. That's Liao Xiaoming, and apologies if I'm doing it right, but I'm doing my best. Speaking yesterday on the BBC about accusations made against China regarding the Uyghur Muslims.
There's no so-called pervasive, massive forced sterilization among Uyghur people in China. It's totally against the truth. Government policy strongly opposed to this kind of practice. But I cannot rule out, single cases for any country.
Let's turn to Dr. Andreas Fulda, who's assistant professor in the School of Politics and International Relations at the University of Nottingham. Well, that's what we hear from the Chinese side. What do you perceive to be reality? Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Nick. Well, first and foremost, it's good to see that the British public is now fully aware of the systemic and endemic human rights abuses of Uyghurs and Kazakhs in mainland China. But I do think that just knowing about the crimes against humanity in mainland China is not enough. It's really high time for liberal democracies around the world to constrain the authoritarian excesses of the Communist Party.
What is it that upsets Beijing so much about the Uyghur Muslims?
The problem is that cultural difference, religious difference is always being treated the same, through homogenization. And so it is very unfortunate that the good people in the United Xinjiang, the Uyghurs in Kazakhstan, they now have to basically become Chinese, and they're forced to learn Chinese. They are kind of held in these internment camps or in labor camps, and this is really something of a minority policy that cannot function. And there are increasing numbers of people who actually call this a genocide and make the case that the treatment of the Uyghurs is actually meeting all of the criteria of the Genocide Convention.
What do you think the British government, or possibly more of the other governments around the world, should be doing?
Now, there's a broad bipartisan consensus here in the UK that the British government should impose Magnitsky sanctions on senior officials who are responsible for these human rights violations. And Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab has for many years
that's just to explain, that's of course freezing the financial assets of people who are directly involved in the so-called sanctions that you mentioned. Do go on. Yeah.
Yes, correct. And these are far more targeted. So we're not talking about like blanket, like economic sanctions against China. It's really about identifying those individuals who are responsible for these atrocities, so that they can no longer travel to, say, the UK, the US, and that they have their overseas assets freeze. And I think that to bring such a process to light.
suspicion of attempted murder, not far from here on Wilson Avenue. It was all over in the space of about an hour or so. No one else was injured. Sussex police were very quick to warn terrorism and not investigating it along those lines at all, and they say there's currently nothing to suggest any other person was involved or anyone else was involved. Now, there were initially grave concerns about the conditions of the victim, but his injuries are being assessed and as mentioned, he's since been discharged. And after going into a lockdown yesterday, things are now starting to return to normal here at the hospital this morning. Patients arriving as usual.
coronavirus vaccines that are still in development. It's also ordered a treatment containing COVID-19 antibodies for people who can't receive one of the jabs. The Foreign Secretary will make a statement to the Commons later on the new security law China has imposed on Hong Kong. Tory MPs are calling for the UK's extradition agreement with Hong Kong to be suspended. The weather, a few showers across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, but most areas staying fine and dry with warm sunny spells. A high of 22 Celsius.
This is LBC.
Wilmslow, Marlow, Maida Vale, Sunningdale, Harrogate, Harborne, Climax the Sea. Right now, top people in top companies are all over the place. But they won't appear that way with Moneypenny's hand-picked receptionists supporting your in-house switchboard. We answer calls remotely, professionally, brilliantly, and economically. Transferring them to your own company. Your office is better together. Rethink the way your office works. Moneypenny.
What have you missed the most?
Speaking on LBC last week, are having to pay. We'll have more on that in just a moment. Now, on the subject of cash, let's dive into the world of money. And market 7:34 is the time. From Accuracy Exchange, David Brewitt joins me now. And there's been a lot of mutter. I picked up on it in one of the papers last night that there could be jobs going at M&S. Marks and Spencer's. David, good morning.
Morning to you, Nick. Yes, it is possible. I mean, they've got a staggering number of people. The food has obviously done extremely well. There's a total of 78,000 people at Marks and Spencer. Harvey Nichols got 1,500 employees. Many people are saying as many as a third man to go. The list is
another 500. Yeah. But we just said goodbye to around 2,000 jobs. Just a couple of minutes.
Yeah, half not good, but the one thing that you've beaten on about for days, months, and weeks, Nick, and I'm going to endorse it. Get back to work and spend your money, because if you don't, it's going to get worse.
A lot of people won't have it though, you know. A lot of people, when I say it, they get really angry.
I know, me too. I get a lot of abuse as well, but it's balancing what you want to leave for your children and the rest of it, and understanding that risk is there in life. I don't want to be ludicrous cause for reflection. I just hope that, good sense prevails all the way round, though I think very strong stances have been taken, and of course with Mike Pompei's visit to London doesn't augur well, I don't think, for any easing of the situation.
Where, of course, if you're trying to get one, it's possibly not good news, but if you have got one, then it might be viewed in a different fashion. I speak of houses and home house prices today.
Yes, there's been a tremendous surge. I was talking to an estate agent over the weekend, and he said he's never been so busy in all his life, which is very good news. And the likelihood is that house prices will go up significantly. But I do throw caution to the wind. By that I say it's extremely important that people understand that about 30% of those sales agreed may not necessarily go through. The threat of unemployment, can you make these mortgage repayments? This is the problem. But at the moment, at the lower end of the market, between 100,000 and 500,000, there is huge demand. People want to get out of urban situations into rural ones, and estate agents have never been busier. I hope it can be sustained.
David, we'll talk. Thank you later. David Buick from Aquis Exchange.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Just on the subject of jobs, and I'm acutely aware in my conversation with David Buick, and it was a bit like when I used to give you the COVID-19 figures as well. An additional 189 people died. That takes the total of 43,000. And I would say, my condolences, because it's a piece of paper for me. It's a relative. It's your granddad, your grandma, your husband, whatever it might be. And these jobs, David and I there, 500 going here, 500 going there, 500. For the love of God, this is. And then I turn here. A company, engineering firm, Lontra, in Birmingham, opening later this year. So they put up an advert. They need 10 jobs, 10, which is great. I'm not knocking it. They've had 15,000 applications in 2 days. So that's 10 jobs. In 2 days, 15,000 people. I cannot stress to you enough, I keep telling you this, if you are vulnerable, if you have to shield, if you have some kind of pulmonary disorder or whatever, obviously you can't go back, but otherwise, for the love of God, we need to get the country back to work. Now, the people who we've been cheering and applauding every Thursday, and then of course a couple of Sundays ago, the NHS staff, they've worked all the way through, haven't they? Fantastic. And well, you'd think now that the government realise their value, but I find it extraordinary that the suspension of parking charges for NHS staff in England has now been removed. Something that Health Secretary Matt Hancock seemed unaware of when he spoke to LBC last week.
And we're keeping hospital parking free for staff for now. We will have to resolve this in the medium term. Of course we will, because as and when visitors are allowed back to hospitals, there isn't enough parking space for everyone.
Well, he's simply wrong, and I've got the charges. Whether you want to go to the London hospital, guys in London, it's £77 per day. If you arrive at these prices are exactly the wrong time to arrive, so at a peak, if you will. We'll go to Leeds General Infirmary, that's £16.40 a day. Brighton and Sussex Hospital, well, possibly that's in the news actually for even graver problems than this, but that's £18 a day. Do you want to go to King's Lynn, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, £15.60. This is outrageous. And here's the thing, before I speak to the former Health Secretary, here's the thing, we've got the figure. This costs the NHS, this nets the NHS £65 million. Okay, now before you start screaming at me, we need the money, that the running the National Health Service is in the terms of approximately 100 billion pounds. So I find this extraordinary. Enough from me. Let's speak with Andy Burnham, who of course was Health Secretary, served under the last Labour government, and is now Mayor of Greater Manchester and joins me now. Mr Mayor, your reaction to this. Do you think it's right that the government, having applauded them one day, is now taking money out of their purse the next? Morning to you.
No, I don't, Nick. Good morning. No, if you've made that gesture, then stand by it. We're still in the middle of this pandemic, and staff are still out there on the front line. It was a good gesture. It was the right thing to do. And actually, it's more than a gesture, isn't it, given the numbers you've just read out. To take it away, I think, just undermines having done it in the first place.